All right, let's go ahead and get started. And as I said, I'm Bonnie McFarland, and this is our Consolidated Application Workshop for the spring submission. And with me and backing me up are Adrienne Balcazar, Rachel Garcia, and Jeannie Keith. So they'll be helping us out with questions today. And as I mentioned earlier, in the chat, you'll find the link to the handouts, and also there's a handout for another item that we're going to be referencing later, an executive summary. So those are available to you. If you have questions as we go, please put them in the chat. We will stop periodically and take a look at those questions for you. So this is a two-part webinar. And the first part is primarily for those of you who might be new to the consolidated application, or if you haven't been responsible for the spring submission in the past, you're new to the spring submission. And again, the link is in the chat for the handouts. So just keep checking in there. We'll keep posting it too. So this is also for anyone who might like a review on the application and a little bit of more information about some of the processes for submitting. So let's move to the next slide. And this is going to be about 45 minutes for this part. And what we're going to talk about are some of an overview of the CONAP, what it is, related tasks that you need to do connected with the CONAP that you might not be aware of, and then also how the application works, how the CARS system works, and how to use the reporting system. After that, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll start with a page-by-page walkthrough of the application. So let's go ahead and get started. So what is the purpose of the CONAP? We're going to start with that. What's the purpose and what are some of its relationships to federal Every Student Succeeds Act programs? So on the next slide, you'll see that the purpose of the CONAP is really essentially to get your federal funding, all right, which is why most of you are here today, I'm sure. It's a condition of funding for receiving the funds. So before you can receive the funds, you have to submit an application. That sort of is one of the things that triggers your allowability for CDE to get that money out to you. So it's changed over time. In the past, we've had some state programs in the consolidated application, and it's certainly possible that could happen in the future. But for now, it's only used for federal program data collection. The reason sometimes additional things kind of get thrown into the CONAP is because almost every district in the state submits the application, and it's a good way for the CDE to collect data that they need. But right now it's pretty limited, and this year you'll find that it's even perhaps more limited than it has been in the past. And before we go ahead, you'll note I think I may have used the term LEA, and as we go through today, LEA is a local education agency, and that includes county offices, school districts, and charter schools. If we use the term district, generally that's because this particular area applies only to school districts and charters are exempt from it. So just to clarify on that in terms of a bit of a definition. All right, so let's take a look at the CONAP and the LEA plan. So I said the consolidated application, and you heard me. CONAP is another acronym everybody uses for the consolidated application, so you'll hear that interchangeably. But I mentioned that the consolidated application is a condition for receipt of funding. In other words, if you don't have it in, you won't get the money. There's another document that's required for receipt of funding, and federal law calls it an LEA, or local education agency plan. That plan is submitted once every authorization. And what I mean by an authorization, essentially when a program, Congress reauthorizes, they give it a new name. So when we moved from No Child Left Behind to the Every Student Succeeds Act, that was a reauthorization. So you were required to submit an LEA plan. If you were part of developing that plan, you need to become familiar with it and know what needs to be updated, because it's another thing that triggers your funding for your federal programs. So let's take a look on the next slide, what we're talking about. What is a local education agency plan? In California, That's what we call the LCAP federal addendum. So feds call it LEA plan. We call it now an LCAP federal addendum. And that's because in California, we see the LCAP and the federal addendum, which is your description of your federal programs, as working together, because your federal program should supplement your state program. So those two are both required. And when you go into your funding information on the CD website, you'll see a column for both of those two items, the CONAP and the LEA plan. And if either one of those is blank, it's going to mean that you aren't getting the funding for that particular funding source. So important to know what those are. So that's for titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, next, for 2020, I said it's only submitted once, and for most of you, you submitted it in 2019 is when the last submission of the LCAP federal addendum was. For most of you, that's it. You don't have to resubmit it again. Anything you do is at the local level, all your updates. But there are two types of LEAs, and they're primarily going to be charter schools who might be required to submit a new one. And that would be if your LEA, and this would likely be a charter, if you're applying for federal ESSA funds for the first time, you're either a new charter or new to federal programs, you're just applying. In that case, you're going to have to contact CDE and look at submitting a federal addendum for those programs you're interested in applying for. So if you've never applied for federal programs before, then you will need to, apply if you haven't applied in the last 2 years. The other LEAs, and this could be districts or charter schools, are those of you that might be applying for new federal funding, okay, new federal formula grant funding. So if you're applying, if you maybe applied for Title I and II before, but you never got Title III or Title IV, then you're going to have to complete an addendum for those sections of it. So if you're, and this applied to a lot of districts when we started getting an influx of federal funds, a lot of districts that previously didn't apply for Title I found that that was triggering other funding. So they started applying, but they weren't able to get it until you had that addendum completed. So those are the only two of you that would need to submit it. Otherwise, it should be updated regularly on the local level and kept, and it should match what your current plan looks like. But that's a local change and doesn't have to be submitted to CDE. All right, back to the CONAP on the next slide. Whoop, we're not back to the CONAP yet. One more. All right. Again, that's just what I said. I was ahead of myself. If you've got an approved federal addendum, what you should do is update it annually to make sure it matches your current program. So if things change over time, your Title II, you're doing something different, then take a look at your addendum. You should update it. Some of the federal program reviewers actually use the addendum to review the program. I know particularly Title III, they're going to look at your Title III section and say, does it match what you're actually doing with your funding right now? So for those of you that don't have to resubmit, that's what you need to be doing. All right, the next one now is back to the CONAP. Right? And this is just a kind of a heads up for you that the consolidated application is one application, but it's submitted in 2 parts. And it's important to know that because the 2 parts are related. And sometimes you'll be submitting something in one and you're having a problem with the submission and you can't figure it out. And the reason is that what you need to fix goes back to a prior submission. So the 2 of them are linked, and that's important to know. The other reason it's important to know is that in the winter release, a number of things are reported, but those are things that need to be happening throughout the school year. Because they're reported out in February doesn't mean you don't do them until February. So a lot of people find things, they'll get a report in February and say, oh my gosh, we need to do this. Well, you should have been doing it from the beginning. So let's take a look at some of the differences. The spring submission, which you submit, whoops, can we back up? Yeah. I'm sorry. We're looking at those 2 boxes. The spring submission, it's submitted usually in June. This year it was delayed, so it'll be submitted in July. That's where you're actually applying for the funds. So it's an application for participation in your formula grant programs. That's why the spring submission requires local board approval. There's no requirement in the winter because it's a report, not an application. So you have to have board approval for the spring release. You also, in the spring release, you're going to be assuring that you're going to meet certain federal requirements. So you have to attest to the legal assurances, and there are other certifications that are included in that submission. And then there are expenditure reports, typically for the past 2 years, and this time we have one for 3 years, and we'll take a look at that. There's also documentation of your private school consultation in the spring. The next report is the winter report, and that's a largely fiscal report. You get your final entitlements for all your funded programs. Of course, you have those posted earlier, but those are printed in the application. You get a report of funds. You're going to report what you're spending for indirect cost, administrative costs for various reservations. You're going to report your school level allocations. Again, this is why we say they're related. Those allocations need to go out now, but you report them in February. Expenditure reports and carryover reports for Title I. So those are the two submissions. The first one we're looking at is the pink one on top, the June submission, but you need to keep those others in mind. All right, next slide. So because of that, planning ahead is important. The decisions you make now are going to impact your programs for the coming year. And a lot of those decisions are reported in February, so they don't pop up. You don't really know about what's going to be reported unless you go back to last year's consolidated application that you just submitted in February. So if you're brand new, I'd recommend you go back and look at what was submitted in your February submission, so you get an idea of the kinds of things that'll be reported. All right, next slide. All right, so here are some of the decisions that you need to be making now. First of all, Title I school ranking. All right. Title I, you report on how you ranked your schools and how you are allocating funds. You report that in the winter, but school's starting very soon. So you need to now be ranking your schools and identifying which schools are Title I schools, how much funding they're going to get, notifying them. And we're going to talk about that in the second part today, what that looks like. Also, authorized reservations. You report Title I has some required and allowable reservations. You report them in February, but you need to be spending that money and determining how much you're reserving now. Federal transferability, you can transfer funds among certain programs, and you need to, again, you report that later, need to do it now. And your equitable services, of course, those services, you're providing them throughout the year. Title I carryover, you need to know what you're going to do with any carryover that you have. Are you going to keep, is that going to individual school sites, or is it going for a reservation? How are you going to do that? And are you going to consolidate administrative costs? So lots of things that need to happen now that aren't reflected in the application, but they affect schools. All right, now we're going to turn to some vocabulary. All right. And as I said, these are just some terms we're going to be using, and just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. As I said, CONAP is what we call the consolidated application. It is the application required for receipt of funds. Okay, so the consolidated application is the application for funding. CARS is the system through which you report your data for those collections. So it's the Consolidated Application Reporting System. So the application is the actual what, and the CARS is the how. And as we said, LEA, local education agency, includes districts, charters, and county offices. And when we use that, we generally mean that includes all of those. Right, next, some more specific related to the CARS system, some vocabulary. First is a data dependency. A data collection, I'm sorry. A data collection is the page that you're filling out. That's what they refer to. Each page that you fill out, it's not a page, it's electronic, but it's called a data collection. So whether it's a certification or a report, that's what those are referred to. Displayed data is the data that is displayed already for you. In other words, it's pre-populated, and it could come from various sources. It could come from another data collection. And you may have reported something in a prior year, and that shows up as displayed data. And you can't edit it because it's already been certified and it's something that's done. Also, it could be things like your allocation amount. You can't change that. Source data from an outside source, and this would be more where your allocations come from. In other words, CDE populates it with some information, and you can't change that information. Calculated data is data from another data collection or the same data collection that is sort of added up in the system, and it can be edited. So if it's calculated data, you may put a number in one place and then you put another number, and those two pop up to a calculated amount. So you have to go back. If it's on a previous page, you have to go back to the previous page to change that amount in order to change the calculated data, but you can edit it. So you can see there's a lot of kinds of numbers that pop up in there, and you want to know where they come from so you know how to fix them, or if you can change them. Right, next, more vocabulary I think we have coming, and that has to do with data dependency. This refers to an instance in which the data on one page impacts the data on another page. And in that case, it makes, they recommend, CARS recommends that you, to avoid errors, that you complete the pages in the order in which they appear on your home page in the system. That doesn't always work, but usually that means that when you complete one page, that puts the data popping over into the next page accurately. Sometimes you run into a problem and you're trying to get something to add, and you can't certify. It won't let you certify, and there's a problem. You can't figure out what it is. You look at the page looks perfect, but you realize it has to do with something on a prior page that you need to go back and fix before you can submit that page. So data dependency can give you a lot of headaches if you aren't aware that, oh, maybe I need to look at another page and fix that before I can submit this page. All right, so doing your pages in order can help with that. All right, and a couple other vocabulary message words and CARS that you'll run into, and these are messages that you might get when you're submitting your data. One is a warning message. A warning message pops up when there's some sort of a problem. There's some data that you've submitted isn't what the system is expecting, or a system rule isn't met, or a certification dependency, something had to be certified previously. You can usually certify a page with a warning message. Okay? So a warning message doesn't stop you from certifying, but it does give you a message that something's wrong. And if you get a warning message, just make sure you know what the problem is. And sometimes you're like, I'm okay with it. I know what the problem is, but it's okay. And I have an answer if I'm asked about it, because a warning message can trigger a call from the department saying, what happened here? But you need to be able to respond to it, and you can go ahead and certify. An error message is different. An error message means something that is required is not there, a requirement's not met, you broke a rule that you can't break, okay? And those have to be corrected before you can move on. So warning message, know what the problem is, and then you decide if you want to make a change. Error message, you have to change it. All right. So next we have just a summary of the changes. And this one, actually, if you're new, you came in at a lucky time, because this report is actually, this submission is somewhat shorter than most. And in most cases, some of these have been submissions that are removed. So, but one thing that's been added is Title II. There's a special report required for Title II, and that's a 36-month report. And that's because that's not typical to have a 36-month report, but that's because we had that federal waiver last year that allowed you to carry over 18-19 funds for an additional year. So, and Title II is the only program that's requiring a reporting on that, because most of the other programs you've already reported recently, but Title II hasn't they didn't have, I think it's a 24-month report. So you have a 36-month report, which should be close to a closeout report for that money. Title III, English learner, there are some changes in the reimbursement on both the EL and immigrant forms. Essentially, they've been simplified. And then the last two were removed. Your Title IV, last year you had a use of funds report, that's not in it. And also for rural schools, their report's missing. So you can see most of them are either simplified or removed, some of the reports. All right, next. So to find more information, here's some links. You can go, and you need to be on the ConApp listserv. If you got the notification that that the system was open, then you're on the listserv, and that's good. If not, send an email to the listserv and make sure you're on that so you get flashes. Sometimes something happens with the system and they send things out to let people know, or there's a glitch or something. Haven't had many lately, but it's good to be on that. Some additional tools on the next page are, let's see, again, on the CDE website, there's a calendar, a data collection, so you can see what data collections are coming and what were there in the past. There's guidance, instructions, which we'll talk about in a minute. Legal assurances, we'll also talk about that. There's a place for contacts if you have questions for particular programs. A link to program profiles, which are very helpful if you're not familiar with the program. They give you a little overview of the program. And then this isn't on the CDE website down at the bottom, but it is on the link that was just posted. We provided you with a sample executive board summary in an editable format, so you can fix it, change it to fit your program. It's a board summary for your board review, so they know what the ConApp is, what the programs are, and you can edit that as needed to reflect the programs in your LEA. And that's available to you on our website. Okay. All right. And this is how you get into the system. You need to, first of all, you need to log in on the centralized authenticating system. And if you've been around for a while dealing with either FPM or the ConApp, you're probably in the system. Just make sure your password expires. They say it expires every 90 days. I don't believe that, but you might check it anyway. They seem to last a little bit long, quite a bit longer than that. But you can access this either from the main page or go directly to the CARS reporting page, and you'll see, first of all, a link. The first link is for you to register in CAS. If you've already done it, you can skip that and go to the second link, which is the CARS login link. And that's on the next page. Okay, this is where you're going to log in. Again, your password and new users. If you're a new user, you'll have to contact CDE, and generally your superintendent has to allow you access to the system to get you in and get you started. So if you have trouble logging in, contact the CARS support desk and they can help you out on that. All right, so once you're in the system, there are different roles and permissions. And this is taken from the CARS user guide. If you go to the website, the CDE main page for the Consolidated Application, you'll find something called a CARS user guide. If you haven't used the system before, it's a really helpful document. It's quite old, it's several years old, which tells you how stable the system is. Nothing's changed, but it goes step by step. And if you run into problems with system issues, check out the CARS user guide. Also on the CDE website, you're going to find on the user guide, you're going to find a link to a webinar presentation, and it's a step-by-step walk through how to use CARS. And you can speed through it if you're having trouble with a particular part, but that's particularly helpful. And it looks like someone found one of our links is probably out of date. We'll get you the new one and post it in there for that. Sorry about that. So the system allows for certain roles to be assigned for specific individuals in your district, depending on what their role is and what they're going to be doing. The first is the authorized representative, and that's either the superintendent or their designee. Depending on how hands-on your superintendent is, they may designate someone to do that, because there are some pages that only the authorized representative can submit. And those are primarily in the spring submission, because they're certifications that have to have the authorized representative's signature. So the authorized representative can do just about everything. They can certify multiple reports. They can add, edit data. They have pretty much full access. The next is the data entry representative, and they can edit and data and certify certain reports. Okay, so these are going to be the people who are really working, I call them the worker bees. They're the ones that are in there entering data, and they're going to enter and save draft data. So these are people that you're going to want to assign that role. The general staff role is for those staff who are not really working in the system, but you want to provide them with the ability to review certified data or draft data. They can go in and look, but they can't do anything. And you see the note there, it says for county office support. If you need support from your county office or any other support provider, this is the role you'll want to give them, because you don't want them in there messing around with your system. Okay, you don't want anyone in there doing things, entering data other than authorized people, but you do have people who might want to support you. And for example, we at the county, we can't see inside your system unless you give us general staff access. So that's what that one is for. The LEA user administrators, likely those of you on this call, and that's the person responsible for managing and accessing all those roles. This is the person who decides who's going to be the authorized rep, who's going to enter data, who might general staff be. So they have the ability to view certified or draft data. You can access the user management system, and that system is what allows you to grant access and assign roles in the system. So again, that's in the CARS user guide if you want more information on that. All right, and let's see, next we have, you notice at the top, and we mentioned the contacts. This is where you're going to be able to see who your contacts are and who the users are, what's currently assigned. So you can go in, if you are the user administrator, you'll have that tab and you can check and see who's already assigned in your district. You know, and the tabs at the top, you'll notice when you go in the system, you're going to see different tabs depending on your role. So some people, depending on what they can do, different tabs will pop up. So if you don't see a particular tab on there, it means you don't have access to those particular reports. Okay, so let's take a look at the tabs. And first of all, there's a home tab. And the home tab is where you can open, you'll see all your data collections. When you open the tab, what you're going to see are only data collections that apply to your LEA. So we're going to talk about a lot of data collections, and if you don't get a funding source or something isn't applicable, it won't show. The data entry forms, that includes all your open data collections. Certification preview shows all your data collections that have already been certified. The certified data form is where you can go in and certify your draft data. And then, as I said, the user allows the LEA is the one who can manage access to those roles. All right, next slide is this is a look what your homepage will look like. Okay, again, only the data collections for your district will show. You can see there are 3 different years here on these data collections for this particular district. The status will change from a draft to certified. When you certify the data, you'll see there's status there, but this is what you'll see on your main page, so you know all the collections that are applicable to you. And let's take a look at what those are for this spring. For this spring submission, you'll see, again, the application was released on June 7th, and it's due July 22nd. And these are all the possible data collections. So you can see 18-19, we have that 36-month report. For 19-20, you have several expenditure reports. For 21-22, that looks really scary, but a lot of those are, you'll see, say Part D, and those are only for primarily county office programs that serve delinquent youth. Okay, and then the next slide finally shows your 21-22 data collection, and this is where you're going to be certifying assurances and actually applying for the funds. On the next slide, we'll see again a screenshot of the main page, and here's where you find the consolidated application instructions and the guidance, and you can access various pieces of information you're going to need from the main page. But the instructions are and the guidance are probably two that you're going to use, particularly the instructions. So let's look at the difference in those two. The instructions provide you with a step-by-step what you need to do to complete the application for each data collection. They also identify possible error messages and warning messages. They'll tell you this is going to trigger an error, this is going to trigger a warning, and then they tell you what you have to do to resolve them. And they also identify the CDE staff contact that you should get in touch with for various questions. So the instructions are really your go-to guide to go through the application, and they're incredibly helpful. In terms of contacting staff, there are various contacts. The ConApp support desk is who can provide you technical support. So if something's going wrong with the system, you can contact the ConApp support desk and they'll give you technical support. For specific program information, the staff contact, there'll be a program staff contact for each page. And if you have questions about what a requirement is, they're the best ones to contact. In some cases, you'll find a fiscal staff contact. And if you have a program question that's really based on fiscal reporting, contact those people and let them know. So you have multiple people you can contact, but to get the best answer, get to the right person. The guidance is fairly limited. It just addresses a few of the data collections, some legal requirements. They talk about records retention and primarily Title III programs. So that's what you'll find in there. So on the next page, we'll take a look at the instructions and what you can expect. So first of all, the instructions are going to tell you what's the purpose of this data collection. Why are we doing it? Then it gives you perhaps some guidance, a little bit about the program, the staff contacts. You can see there's where they listed. They're going to tell you about any displayed data. We talked about displayed data. That's data that's already pre-populated. So in this case, your entitlement was all that was posted on this particular page. Then it gives you the step-by-step. You can see each step that you need to do to enter the expenditures. What are you going to enter for every line? They're going to give you the exact instructions, what you do. Next slide continues. And this is where you're going to continue. You can see this one. There's a lot of it's just a lot of individual expenditures that need to be included, and they tell you exactly what needs to be included. The next page looks at the error message, and this is where warnings or errors will show up. And you can see on this page over on the right hand side, they talk about, first it says there's the name of the collection, there's an error message, and the resolution. In this case, it's a warning only. This is Title II, and these folks exceeded their administrative and indirect costs, and we'll talk about why they only got a warning and not an error message on that one. All right. All right, next is, this is from the guidance, and the guidance talks about records retention, just reminding you to keep records at least 3 years after the completion of the grant. We recommend 5 because auditors can go back 5 years, but that's the kind of thing that you'll find in the guidance. The next slide is a screenshot of the request for applications page. And this is really, there's the main thing you'll find on this page are your legal assurances. And that's down at the bottom. If you click on that, you'll see all the legal assurances. These are all the things the LEA is required to agree to in order to receive the funds. So let's take a look at those. On the next slide, you'll see that your agency, you need a signature of your authorized representative, and that's where that either the district superintendent or designee, that authorized representative, on the certificate of assurances page. So they are assuring that the district is going to abide by all of these assurances. And we'll take a look at that page later in the second half, but you need to make sure that they know what they're agreeing to. So the next slide gives you just a quick shot of all the areas of assurances that are covered. So you can see, and within these are specific legal assurances. So the first are general assurances. These are general federal requirements and state requirements for receipt of funds. There are specific ones related to the LEA plan, which we talked about, some specifically for Title I issues. You can see foster care is another one where there are assurances, and then Title II, III, and IV all have sections, and within those sections are specific legal assurances. And some examples of those on the next slide. On the next slide, we'll look at the certification. Again, you need to print a copy of that page, and you need to have that on file. So in case of review, a reviewer may ask to see that you did certify those assurances. And they'll bring that out. If you have a compliance issue, they'll point out perhaps, well, you signed this assurance, you were going to do this. So it's important that your superintendent know what's in those assurances so there's no surprises. All right. And then a summary, original signatures, you're going to require those on multiple pages that we'll look at in the document. So you need to download a full copy of the document and have original signatures on numerous certification pages. And this is one. All right, next is a reminder, I think. Oh, just a reminder, if you have any new schools, and this usually pops up in the second submission, but if you have new schools that you want to go into your online reporting system and update those, so all your schools will show up in the submission when you go to allocate your Title I funds, because if they're not showing up in that system, they won't show up in the Con App, and you won't be able to allocate funds to them. So that's just a little reminder. Another reminder has to do with funding timelines. And you can see we have 2018-19 and 2019-20 we're looking at. Because of the federal waiver, if you had remaining 18-19 funds, you got another year to spend them. But 19-20 funds will expire this September. So you can see you get funds for 12 months. And then you get an additional 12 months because of the tidings amendment. So that gives you 2 years to spend the funds. And then you get an additional 3 months just because our state and federal budget cycles are 3 months difference. So that's why grants end on September 30th. But as you see here, both of these are ending on September 30th because your 18-19 funds were, you received a waiver. So they gave you an extra year. So the reason I point this out is it's important for you to check and see how much fund money is left, because you have between now and September 30th to spend all that money, or it has to revert to the federal treasury. So let's see how you find that out. First of all, your funding's reported through federal cash management system. Your business office should be reporting quarterly how much money that you're spending in each of your grant programs separately. And then your individual apportionments quarterly are based on how much you've spent. So if you're not spending down 25% of your funding every quarter, you're not getting new money, and that can impact your cash flow. Money's not coming to the district. So why do we mention that here? Because sometimes you'll see expenditures that don't match and what's in CMDC, and they should be pretty close. What your business office is reporting in the cash management system should be pretty close to what you're reporting in the CONAP. And if not, you need to check and see, is money coming to the district? Are you reporting it? Because you don't want to come to the end of the grant cycle and you say you've spent the money and CDE says it was never reported. So it can be a red flag. And we'll take a look at how you can find that. If you want to check on your cash balances, you can go to the CDE website under the home page and go to Finance and Grants. And you're going to look at under allocations and apportionments, you're going to see categorical programs listed. When you go there, you find whatever program, Title 1, 2, 3, that you want to look at. When you click on that, you'll see numerous years. And you want to look at what year. So you're particularly concerned now about 1819 and 1920. If you click on funding results, you're going to get a spreadsheet with all the LEAs in the state, but you will find yours and you can look and you can find what your total entitlement was, your current balance, and how much is being paid to your district every quarter. Right? And here's a screenshot on the next slide of what that looks like and how to get there. So finance and grants, go to categorical programs. This is what you'll see on the page, and you can see multiple years. And this is what you're looking for. We mentioned funding profiles before. Those are there. They tell you what the program's about, and what you want are the funding results. And that's where you click on that and you'll find that funding amount. So that's how you check to see how much money's left. So we just mention that because it's kind of important. So what do you need to check? As we said, 1819, the funds expire on September 30th. So you want to make sure you're checking those funds. 1920, also that the period of availability ends on September 30th. So you want to check those. And thirdly, you want to check your 2021 Title I Part A funds because you have a 15% carryover limit for Title I Part A funds. So it's important for you to check that and make sure you've spent down 85% of the funds, or you will by that date. All right. All right, that was a quick whiz through a number of things. We're going to go in depth in a few minutes, but let's take a look. We have a couple minutes. We can see if there were some questions in there. Is this a deadline applicable? Yes, I'm picking off just what I see here, probably out of order. The deadline, yes, the funding deadline is applicable to all programs. Title 1, 2, 3, and 4 all have the same 27-month period of availability. So they all end at the same time. The only exception is Title I. It's the only program that has a carryover limit. None of the others have a carryover limit. So you have the full 27 months to spend the whole amount. Yes, the recording will be available. Yeah. And any of you see any other questions, my folks there? Executive summary. Yeah, the one we posted. Yes, Francisco, we did just update the CONAP executive summary. Again, you need to take a look at and see some things. We put everything in there that could possibly apply to a district. So just, it's in a Word format. You can edit it for your use. Waiver forms. If you're talking about a carryover waiver, that comes in the winter consolidated application submission for Title I. If you're talking about federal flexibility waivers, there was no need to apply for that. The state applied on behalf of all districts in the state. So you got that waiver, easy peasy. You don't have to apply for it. All right. And the link. Yeah, that data collection calendar, I see that's what was missing on that link. It kind of comes and goes, and sometimes it's updated and sometimes it isn't. We'll check into that and see if we can get it back out to everyone who registered where it is. But yeah, sometimes it's not always as available as it might be. So maybe they're updating it. Okay, did I miss any question? 2 new messages. What happens if we don't? What happens if we don't spend 85% Title I by 2021? Oh, okay. Well, two possible things could happen. If you don't spend 85%, you'll be reporting that. It's unfortunate because the report is in February, so you're sort of begging forgiveness when you request it because you passed the deadline. But if you don't spend the funds, you can request a waiver, and that waiver is in the consolidated application itself. If you didn't spend the money, a box will open up and they'll ask you to explain how you plan to spend the funds in the coming year. They want it to be pretty clear, and they want to make sure it's allowable costs and that you have a plan for getting those funds spent down, because the funds will expire the following year. So that's how you apply for a waiver. You want to check though, because CDE is only able to offer a waiver once every 3 years. Okay? And so if you've had a waiver in the past 2 years, they won't be able to approve it. So really important now to check and see, did your LEA apply for a waiver? A lot of districts applied for waivers, and charters too, applied for waivers last year because there was flexibility, and they allowed U.S. Department of Education allowed CDE to approve waivers more than once every 3 years. And a lot of people, due to COVID and close downs and all kinds of things, haven't spent down their funds. So many districts applied last year, which means they won't be eligible for a waiver this coming year. So really important to check on that to see if you applied. But if you didn't, usually CDE is pretty good about approving those waivers. They may ask for more detail on what you're going to do with the funds. We noticed that this year they were kind of tight on that. And they want to make sure you're going to really spend it. For LEAs that applied for funds in April, there will be a problem not having expenses. There is no application in April. So I'm not sure if you applied that late. If they do, sometimes they do. I'm guessing you're probably, it might be a charter school. If you apply, if your Con App went through late in the year and you didn't start getting funding till late, you still have that timeline to spend it. So no, I'm afraid there's no way around that. The funds end when they end. What if you already requested a waiver? Yeah, then you got to spend the money, or it'll have to return it. CDE will send you a bill. So sorry, not the answer we want to end on, because someone asked a happy question next. All right, I think we covered it, unless there's any other questions. We can give you a chance to take a stretch break. We got about 10 minutes. And then we're going to start up and go through a page by page starting at 10 o'clock. Okay, so you don't have to log out or anything. Stay where you are. You can just kind of relax, and we'll start up again in about 10 minutes. All right, and all right, see you then. All right, welcome or welcome back if you joined us earlier for our first part of our webinar. This is Bonnie McFarland, and we're back for part 2, which is going to be a page-by-page walkthrough of the consolidated application. Our first part 1 was initially our part 1 was just a review of the kind of some of the basics, a very fast review of a lot of things that you need to know about the Con App and some related information. The entire webinar, the slides are already posted, and also an executive summary sample, and the recording will be posted as quickly as we can. We have it's being recorded right now, so we'll get it up. I know people are saying how fast will it be up. Okay, so we will get that up as quickly as possible. So we'll send something out when we know it's ready for you. All right, so part 2, again, we looked at the basics, and now we're on to page by page. So let's start with the data collections. All right, so you'll find as you go through, we have a note at the top of each page, and it will tell you where to find more detailed information in the instructions or to answer your questions. So as you go through, you'll see a little yellow note on the top of each slide, and that refers to the instructions. We talked about the instructions previously. If you've done the CON-App before, I'm sure you're familiar with them, that the instructions are where you find the step-by-step information about how to complete the forms and what to do if you receive an error or warning message. So you can see what's included in this application are 4 years of data collections, and that's unusual. And the reason is we have one report that was triggered by the 2018-19 extension of timeline for funding. So it's only one additional report. Otherwise, I think you'll find that the application this year has been abbreviated significantly from in the past. So you'll find a little bit easier, I think, this year to submit. But typically there's no 18-19 because that's a 36-month report, and federal funds are only available for 27 months. So normally you wouldn't have an 18-19, but again, the waiver gave you an extra year if you had any funds left over. So let's take a look at what's included in this application. We looked at this in part 1 also, but for those of you that are joining us, there we are, the 18-19. It's Title 2 that's asking for a 36-month expenditure report. Again, you have 19-20. Those are all expenditure reports for Title 1, 2, and 3. And end of year reporting is for 2021. So that's the current year you're going to be reporting. And as I mentioned earlier, don't panic too much. It looks like a long list, but you'll notice many of them will not apply to most districts because they're Part D delinquent funding, which is primarily county office funding. And then on the next slide continues the 21-22. So this is the actual application for funding. This is where you'll be certifying assurances and indicating which programs you want to apply for. And there are a couple budget pages, but otherwise it's primarily applying for the funds. So that's why this is the application that is going to require board approval. So speaking of that, let's look at the next slide, which talks about some timelines. So the application was released on June 7th. And if you received an email from CDE, that's good news. That means you are on the listserv. If you did not receive that notification, you need to go to the CDE website and sign up for their listserv to make sure you get any notifications. The final submission date is July 22nd, so you can submit up to that date. Sometimes things get a little busy and you have trouble submitting on that date, but so you can submit anytime before that. I know some people went on vacation and got theirs done early. So, but you do have, and we got a lot of questions, and you should have received an email from CDE clarifying the board approval timeline. You can, because many of you don't have board meetings in July, and so a lot of questions came in about that. You are able to put a future board date, but it can't be past August 31st. If you submit after August 31st, then the board date has to be after the date, prior to the date of submission. Okay, so August 31st is the last date you can put for a local board approval on the plan. And for those of you that just don't believe everything you see on a PowerPoint slide or even an email, good for you. The place to find that is on page 87 in the instructions. It tells you it's the August 31st date. Prior to that, the DLAC has to review, and that date that you put in there for DLAC review has to be prior to the board approval date. All right. Okay, and I didn't mention those of you, please put questions in the chat and we'll stop periodically and take a look at those. So, yes, okay. We just have a chat feature on this one. All right, some fiscal terms we just want to review before we get started, because they're going to pop up on most of the pages as we go through, and they're going to can cause some confusion because these terms are applied differently depending on different programs. So let's take a look just and review them. And these have particular significance. It was with the change in ESSA. When ESSA came in, they made some changes in administrative cost caps that caused these terms to be even more important than they were previously. So first of all, administrative costs is a general term. Administrative costs reflect any costs associated with the administration of the program. And this term gets used differently depending on how it's applied to a particular program. So we'll see what that looks like in a minute. But administrative cost just means it's not a direct service to children. It's an administrative cost that's somehow dealing with probably the things that most of you do every day. Right? A direct cost is a cost that can be directly assigned to a program. A direct cost can be, we usually think of a direct cost as a direct instructional cost, services directly to students, but a direct cost can also be an administrative cost. That means that the cost of that administrative service can be directly tied to support of the program. Right? You can directly see, and you have it budgeted, your job description, everything shows that administrative service directly supports the program, as opposed to an indirect cost. An indirect cost is an agency-wide sort of business and administrative cost, and it's not attributed to you can't attribute it to a particular program. Things like lights, air conditioning are included in indirect costs. Purchasing is often part of that. All the things you have purchasing people that do all that work in purchasing, you can't say, well, they did this bit. You can't tie one cost to it. So federal programs allow districts, LEAs, to take an approved indirect cost rate and apply it to federal programs based on those services that are more intangible, that you can't really directly attribute. Now, having said that, it's really important that you know, and the indirect costs are sometimes a mystery, okay? They shouldn't be a mystery. You need to know what is being charged for, what kinds of things are being charged for direct costs, because federal regulations do not allow you to count a cost as a direct cost and an indirect cost. So if office space is an indirect cost, then your program can't be charged for office space. If it's not, then they possibly could be charged administrative costs. So you need to find out, what are you charging indirect to, and what's a direct cost that I can count, okay? So important terms. Some other, so difference, and again, I think we probably just said that, the cost of an LEA, they can be, an administrative cost can be either direct or it can be indirect. And again, a cost can't be included as both. And where we're referring you here is to the California School Accounting Manual. Procedure 915 talks about indirect costs and direct costs and what's the difference. The federal guidance has tightened up on what a direct cost looks like, and they've said that typically clerical costs should not be charged to a program unless you can show the direct support of that service to the program. Okay, so if you have clerical staff in your office, they're providing direct support to a particular federal program, that's a direct administrative cost. But if they're just doing general clerical work, and sometimes some of it's to federal, sometimes some of it's other stuff, then that would not be a direct cost. All right, so why is this important? Why do you care when you're doing the Con App? All right, well, why we care is because some federal programs have caps on administrative costs. And for some programs, that cap covers both direct administrative costs and indirect costs. So you have one chunk. In other words, you have to take the two of those together, and there's a cap on how much those two can be. But other programs have a cap only on direct administrative costs, and they allow you to apply your full indirect costs. So what you're going to see as we go through the pages is some of these are broken out, direct and indirect costs for administration. They're broken out differently, and that depends on how the federal rules apply to the program. All right. So that's why all that talk about direct and indirect costs. All right. And administrative caps. All right, we also just want to mention a couple other things. We talked about some of the programs coming to an end soon, and we want to talk about cash management, some fiscal issues. The federal funds have to be accounted for separately by year. So you can't just put all your Title I funds in a pot for all your years, because as you see in the application, you have to account for funds separately for each year. So that's why fiscal people use this thing called what they call FIFO, which means first in, first out, means you need to spend your oldest funds first. So you need to be watching to make sure, and you can check this. We showed folks in the first session how you check that on the CDE website to make sure your oldest funds are being spent down first, so you don't end up with a situation where you have old money you're going to lose and new money you've been spending, because it has a bit of a domino effect. And these expenditures, they're reported in your cash management system, and you won't get additional money unless you're spending your funds down 25% each quarter. So it's still your money, it's still there as an entitlement, but you aren't getting it if you're not spending it down. So some real important just fiscal things before we get started. All right, so let's take a look at the first data collection, and that is your Title II. That's this special collection for this year. And it's based on, again, the flexibility waiver, that Title II is the only program requiring a 36-month report, and that's because the other programs previously asked for reports, and Title II hasn't requested an expenditure report as recently as the other programs. So they want to check on where you are with spending that Title II money. So the next page gives you a shot of what the page looks like. And you can see at the top, there's where you'll find it in the instructions, and that's what you'll see when you go into CARS. And the 2018 allocation is going to be pre-populated with you for you at the top. And next you see a transferred in, transferred out, and that will also be pre-populated. It'll be pre-populated with whatever you reported in the 18-19 year. So Title II allows you to transfer money in or out. So if you did that in 2018, if you transferred funds out or transferred funds in, those will show up there, and then there'll be a recalculated amount, which is your total available funds. After that, you need to report how expenditures were reported. And as you go through your pages, you're going to see that how you report your expenditures differs by program. So in this case, they're having you report by program areas. So these are allowable programs under Title II. Okay, so you can spend your funds on professional development, recruitment, and then there are miscellaneous class size reductions, some other things, and that's where you have your administrative costs. So on this page, you're reporting it by program areas. All right, you'll notice there's a warning message on this page. All right, and this has to do with what we just talked about, that administrative cost cap. Title II, why is it a warning, not an error? Okay, as we said earlier, an error means you can't submit. You can't do that. A warning means you can, but you should be concerned and it might be questioned. This is a warning because Title II does not have a federal legislative administrative cap. There is none. However, CDE has determined that they will use 15% as a threshold for reasonableness. And reasonableness comes from the Federal Code of Regulations, which talks about reasonable, necessary, allocable, that's required for an expenditure. And they're saying if it's over 15%, we're questioning whether it's reasonable. So you might get a call from CDE if your indirect cost rate is over 15% for Title II. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but it means you need to be able to explain it. And then any remaining funds at the end have to be obligated by September 30th, 2021. So if you have remaining funds there, you need to make sure you're on it and getting those funds spent. So I saw a question pop up about what's transferability. Transferability is in Title V of the federal law, and it allows LEAs to transfer funds among certain programs. And you can transfer funds in or out of Title II Part A or Title IV Part A. You may only transfer funds into Title I or Title III. Okay, so you can't transfer funds out of those two programs. You can transfer funds between Title II and Title IV. You can transfer Title II and Title IV into any of those programs. And so you do that in the year you receive the funds, and that's what's showing up there. So that's what transferability is. All right. All right, so we're done with 1819. It's over. All right, so 1920. All right, 1920 include Title II, Title I Part D, and Title I Part D applies to very few LEAs. I think it's only LAUSD is the only district that receives Part D. And otherwise, it's primarily county office, and that's because it's primarily for incarcerated youth. And so you will see that there are a huge number of data reports for Part D. And since there are very few LEAs that participate, we're going to go over those very quickly. But so when you open your data collection, for 99% of you, nothing will show up for Part D. So you can ignore that. This is the time you can, and we share this with you so you can feel good, because you don't have to do these reports. All right, so again, 1920 funds are going to be expiring again this year, so this September 30th. So these are some to keep your eye on. Let's just take a quick look at Part D, and this is an expenditure carryover report. And the reporting here is by object code. You will see that's different from the previous one, which was by program areas. All right. And just a reminder here, you need to save the page. There's a little save button. Don't forget to save the page at the bottom. Again, for Part D, there's no administrative cap, but they do. So they get the same warning message as Title II. Why are you spending more than 15% on administrative and indirect costs combined? All right. The next Title II has really detailed reporting, and they also have a very flexible program, but the flexibility kind of comes with accountability, and that's what you're seeing here. So again, you can transfer funds into whoops, I'm sorry, back off. This is not, there's only one Title Part D. We're on to Title II. Excuse me, I was so ready for pages and pages. No, it's okay. Go ahead. That was my goof. Okay. All right. So we're back to Title II. All right. So I wonder why there was. So again, if you transferred money into or out of Title II, it will show up there, reported for, that should be 1920 if you reported funds that year. What you're reporting here are for expenditures from July 1st, 2019. That's when you first received this money, through June 30th of this year. Okay, so you're reporting through that reporting period. All right, so it's from the very beginning of the grant through now. Again, on this one, the same warning, as we mentioned, administrative and indirect. If you exceed 15%, you're going to get questioned. Here, you're going to be including any costs for equitable services expenditures. So that's included in this report. And then also there's a section for alternative use costs. For most of you, this won't show up. This is for small rural high poverty districts, and they receive a grant, and it allows them to use the grant in multiple program areas. So if you are a rural low-income district and receive that money, you'll report it on this page. Okay. Once again, it's September 30th. These funds have to be spent. Yes, you have to spend zero, or you will receive an invoice from the department requesting payment of the remaining funds. Okay. All right, now on to, okay, here's what we mentioned again, how the expenditure categories here are reported by allowable costs. And there's where we have the REAP, which is if applicable. Okay. All right, next slide. Now we're on to Title III, and this is for 1920, and all throughout this, you'll find a lot of Title III reporting, because possibly you're reporting on two different Title III programs. Title III Part A has two parts: English Learner Services and Immigrant Services. And most districts receive Title III EL. Not all districts districts receive immigrant funding because it's based on the number of immigrant students and an increase in those students. So for many of you, you'll only have the Title III EL report, but many of you will have both of them. So this would include the amount of the 1920 allocation. And you can see here, there's only a line for funds transferred in because you can't transfer funds out of Title III. So if you transferred funds from Title II or Title IV into Title III, then those will show up on that line and you'll get a new higher allocation amount. And the funds are reported by object codes. And here you see a different message. In this case, you see an error message, not a warning message. And the error message is because Title III only allows a 2% direct administrative cost. It has a cap of 2%. So if you, in the direct administrative cost box, if you have more than 2%, you won't be able to certify this page. All right. So this page is different than the Title II page. You'll see two boxes for administrative costs, direct administrative and indirect costs. So you're putting them separate. And the reason is the direct cost box has a 2% maximum, whereas you can apply your full indirect cost rate to all the rest of the grant, excluding what you charge for direct administration. Okay. So full indirect made a lot of business people very happy now. They can charge their full direct. It used to be 2% for both. Now it's just 2% for direct administrative costs for Title III and your full indirect costs. But you'll get an error message on that 2%, not a warning message. All right, that's Title III. And the next is, I believe, your immigrant. And this is similar, but you'll see one key difference. Again, funds transferred in, can't transfer out by object code, all right? And then you see you get a warning if administrative costs exceed 2%. So why is that? That's because Title III immigrant, unlike Title III EL programs, do not have a legislated cost cap. Okay. However, CDE applies the same thinking to the two programs. They're saying it's Title III, we see 2% as reasonable. So if you exceed 2% on your, and it's broken out here on your direct cost line for administrative costs for Title III immigrant, you'll receive a warning message, not an error message, which means you may be contacted by CDE to say, is this reasonable? Tell us how it's reasonable. Once again, doesn't mean you can't do it, but it means you have to be able to back it up. All right, and next is Title III and immigrant. You can see expenditure reporting. They have categories that's categorized differently. And these are essentially the kind of allowable costs that are allowed under these two programs. So that's how you're going to be reporting your certificate salaries, your classified salaries separately. And then benefits are going to be reported separate, books and supplies, operating expenses, and then your direct and indirect admin costs. So different kind of categories. Okay, next slide is just a reminder, because we keep talking about the end of the grant period, and this is these two, 18, 19, 19, 20. So we just want to give you a reminder about what that means. And that means the funds, it says they have to be obligated. And for federal funds, there are specific definitions about what an obligation is and when it's made. And this is from the Education Department General Administrative Regulations, and it gives you the definitions for an obligation. And you can see they differ. So some of the key differences, the timing of when an obligation is made. This starts getting really important around September when you have money and you're wondering, can we count this? All right. So it differs, whereas obligations for employees are made at the time that they provide the service. So the check might come later, but when do they provide that service? You count that. Obligations for a contractor are made at the time the contract is made, and that would apply to purchases too. If you've made an obligation, you have a contract in place to pay the bill, then that's considered an obligation, even if the bill hasn't been paid yet, but you have an obligation. Right? However, you have 90 days to liquidate it. That means to pay the bill. So that gives you till the end of December to pay for that contract. So getting a contract in place by the deadline would allow you to count it as an obligation. The other thing that's kind of interesting is travel, which we're not doing much of lately, but travel's one where you may pay it ahead. You have to pay for some of your airplane or whatever it is, but you can't count it as obligated until travel's taken. So it's kind of the opposite of a contractor. So this will become important to you in terms of looking at if you have funds you're starting to look at that you have. What's an obligation? Can you count it as an obligation and then get it spent by the 90-day period? All right, so next is, now I've made you all nervous about this money coming to an end. What do we do about it? Well, where do you find your expenditures? If, again, on the CDE website, we mentioned this in the first part. For example, here's where you'd find your English learner programs. All right, and you go, it's under finance and grants and allocations. You're going to go to categorical programs, and up will pop all the years back, goes way back, 16, 17, you can see, which that better be gone. All right. So you can look at your 18, 19 and your 19, 20, and now it has 20, 21 also in there. But this is an old slide, but you can click on your funding results and look in there and you'll see how much CDE is saying you have. Now, you need to check that with your business office because they may be able to say, no, we've spent that, but maybe they didn't report it in cash management. Okay, so it's not showing up at CDE. And that becomes an issue as you're getting toward the end of a grant period. So you want to work with your business office if you see money that looks like there's money left there, and make sure you spend it down. All right, enough on money. We're going to get all that money spent through 1920, and now you're looking at 2021. You can breathe a little easier here. All right. So the 2021 data reports on the next slide, we can see that you're reporting for this year's. Okay, so this is this year's funding, the year that just ended yesterday. All right. It includes some of your private school students served. Again, this is where Title I Part D comes in. I'm sorry about that earlier. So a lot of Part D reporting that won't apply to most of you. Title III private school, there's a reimbursement form and an expenditure report for both Title III, EL, and immigrant. And then also one page that has to do with your homeless policy and monitoring of that. So we'll take a look, and as I said, this is where we're going to go quickly through Part D programs. On the next page is first part. We haven't gotten there yet. This is Part A, Title I. All right, this is private school reporting. Good news here. Good news here is you only have to report the total number of students served by grade level for your private schools. Right? In the past, we've had to break it out by school and it's been more detailed. This is just by grade level. So of all your private school students served under Title I in the 2021 school year, just a total aggregate report. So this is should be a nice, simple one for you. All right, next slide. Okay, and these are, again, all the Part D. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 6 different reports on that. Next slide is the first one. And for Part D programs, this is when we talked about data dependency. It's a good example of data dependency. On this report, these programs have to report the different types of programs they serve. So they have programs for neglected kids, for at-risk students, for juvenile detention, different types of programs. Once they identify those programs on this page, it's going to trigger reports on the subsequent pages. So let's move ahead and take a look. Again, this is students served, and this is where you're going to see they're only reporting based on what they identified on the previous report. They have to report students by age, sex, ethnicity, and status, EL and disabled status. All right. Next slide is just a continuation of that. So you can see how long their report could be if you have multiple programs that you're serving. Next slide is student outcomes. And these are for long-term students who've been in 90 consecutive days. So again, we're looking at some pretty specific kinds of programs for students that are in and out of facilities. So by facility, only long-term students, and they're looking at outcomes for students while they're in the facility and then within 90 days of exiting. So, and again, this is dependent on the facilities indicated on the initial slide. Next one is continuation of outcomes. So see, be glad you aren't reporting on Part D. A lot here. Next page is academic performance. So this is reading and maths, pre and post test. Are they seeing negative impacts, no change, improvement in grade level? Again, these are for long-term students that are in long enough to have pre and post tests. All right, and the next slide is just a continuation. So it goes on. I'm just trying to make you guys feel good that don't have to do this. All right, that's why we go through all these. All right, here's our expenditure carryover page. And again, these programs do not have a cap, so it's that warning message. And this is a report of expenditures from July 1st through June 30th. And it's really an expenditure report, not really just a warning on carryover. Okay, now let's move ahead. Finally, all right, we're out of Part D. All right, on to Title II. Title II, this is a 12-month expenditure report. Very similar to what you did on the previous report, except you're doing it for just this past school year. The reporting period for this is from last July of 2020 through this July, which should say 2021. And you'll include here any expenditures for equitable services under Title II. There's a line for that. Same as in the past, Title II, warning message if you exceeded 15% for admin and indirect costs combined. And next is Title III. All right, this is a reimbursement form. All right, Title III provides reimbursement to LEAs for funds expended on services for children in private schools. So this page, on this page, and again, very simple reporting. This has been simplified. There was a lot more detail in the past, so they really made it quite easy. It's just a total number of private school students who were served in Title III EL programs from July 1 of last year through June 30th. So that total number, and then the reimbursement will come in the 2021 apportionment. So it's usually not a huge amount, so most people don't notice it, but it will be rolled into your next year's apportionment. So Title III is the only program that provides reimbursement for private schools. So this is an important page to fill out to get those funds reimbursed to you. And the next page is also an EL report, but this is an expenditure report. Your displayed data is your 2021 Title III EL allocation. And if you transferred any funds, if you transferred funds into this program, that would have been in the winter consolidated application submission that you did in February. So if you reported any funds transferred in, they will show up here. And once again, you see, because it's Title III EL, you're going to get an error message, not a warning, an error message if you exceed 2% on that direct administrative cost line. Okay? But you can apply your full indirect cost to whatever you didn't reserve for direct administration. So error message on this page, and you won't be able to certify. Okay, so keep that under 2%. And next, we'll move on to, again, you get a reimbursement also for immigrant students served. So if you had a Title III immigrant program, if you received that funding, you will get this report will pop up in your data collection. If you didn't get the program, if you didn't get the funds, it won't pop up. You're going to report your total number of students served, no school level data required, just a total of private school students served under the immigrant program. And you get reimbursed, you get next year in your 21-22 Title III immigrant fund apportionment. Right? And the next page is similar to the last two we just looked at. Immigrant, I told you if you have Title III, you'll see a lot of pages. Title III, this is immigrant funding. If you received it, this report will pop up in your data collection. And the displayed data includes your allocation for Title III immigrant, funds transferred in. Once again, here you see that warning, not an error, a warning for exceeding that 2% because it's not legislated for immigrant, but it is questioned by CDE. Okay, finally, the last report in this collection is the homeless education policy requirements. As you can see, there's a lot on this form. You see by all the notes there's a lot of reporting here. And this is really used by CDE to monitor in part your homeless program to ensure that you're meeting all the requirements. Okay. There are two forms that will pop up, possibly depending on your funding. If you receive Title I Part A, this is the form that will pop up for you, and it's going to include an expenditure section. If you didn't receive Title I Part A funds in the past year, then you'll get the same form, but at the bottom will be cut off. We'll look at that in a minute, but you will not have any expenditure reporting, but all the rest of the reports will be required. Right. The first information required is the contact information for your homeless liaison. So that might be you, but whoever it is, you need to fill that in as to how they can contact that person and ask for email and all sorts of things there. The next set of questions have to do with training, and training is required for the homeless liaison both to receive and to provide training. So the questions are going to ask about training that the liaison participated in, as well as training they provided to specified groups. And those groups include principals and school leaders, attendance officers and registrars, teachers, and aides and counselors. So they'll ask you specifically about each of those groups. Did the liaison provide training to them? And also, did they receive training? The next question is about your policy, and they're asking you to verify that you have a homeless policy in place, put the date of the board approval for that policy, and you need an explanation if you don't have a policy. I can't think of one, but the answer should be yes, we have a policy and here's the date. And then also they'll ask you if it meets federal requirements. The answer to that should also be yes, or again, I can't think of an answer, but you need to write something in that box if it doesn't meet federal requirements. So hopefully the answer is yes, you have a board date, you have an approved policy, and that's all good. The rest of the form has to do with if you receive Title I funding, they're going to ask you to include some information about how funds were spent. So they ask for the amount of funds you spent for services for homeless youth and a description of services. And if no expenditures are reported, they want to comment there. And we'll tell you where this comes from. In the past, we saw CDE was seeing a number of districts that were saying we don't have any homeless youth. And when they looked into it, they found they had homeless youth. And the other thing is because they're homeless students move around. So you need to be prepared to serve those students. So Leanne Wheeler's office has been very much on it in terms of checking to make sure that we're providing services for those children. And if you don't have any expenditures for them, then they're going to ask you to provide an explanation of why. So that's your homeless page. And just a review on the next page, your homeless policy. CSBA, I believe, has a sample policy, but make sure it meets all the requirements. Your policy needs to describe participation of the liaison in professional development. So how are they receiving professional development and how are they providing it? It needs to show how you're removing barriers to enrollment and retention of homeless students and youth. So what are you doing proactively as a district? That needs to be in your policy. How are you ensuring homeless children aren't stigmatized or segregated? And then you need a dispute resolution regarding educational placement. In other words, how is that resolved if a homeless child wants to remain in a school of residence and the decision is that the district decides not to? How is that resolved? Right? So again, you have to indicate the date of the policy on your, so you might start looking and make sure you have that. And it could be that you've had one for some time, so check your board policies. All right, and that's the end of, I think, oh, this is just a copy of what it looks like. Same form. If you don't get Title I, you get the same form, but you don't have the expenditure section because that's about your Title I reservation. The funds primarily you're serving. So if you don't get Title I, you don't have an expenditure, but all the other questions apply. So that is the end of all your reporting for prior years. Right? So everything moving forward is about the application for funding. So when we talk about the application, this is where you're actually applying for new funds for the coming year. So these pages are important because not submitting these pages or not having them done correctly could result in you not getting funding. So let's look at what's included in there, and you'll see there's a lot of certifications. These are all the pages in the for 21-22. Most of them are certifications of federal requirements and identification of the funds you want to apply for. So this is where you're deciding what money do I want for the coming year. All right. Next page is the first page is your certificate of assurances. Right? The certificate of assurances form doesn't just, I'm gonna read what I got from CDE because this is a kind of complicated page to find. Where is this? The certificate of assurances form, it doesn't display under your home tab. It can be found under the data entry forms tab. And this is the only form, when you save it, it's equal to certifying it. Okay, you're certifying that you're abiding by the assurances, but as soon as you save it, that's equivalent to certifying it. In all other CARS forms, you have to save and then certify. It's 2 steps. This is going to be a 1-step process. The only person who can certify it is the person in the authorized representative role. So we talked about in part 1 today, we talked about all those roles. The only person who can certify this page is the authorized representative. If you're ready to certify the other forms and you haven't certified this, when you select the certify tab, the certification assurances will pop up and you'll be prompted to save it. After completing the assurances page, it won't prompt you anymore in the data tab. So it's a little bit complicated, but I think once you get into it, it'll make more sense to you. But it needs to be saved, and it needs to be, you need to maintain a hard copy of this, and you need to have a signature on it. And we ask, well, there's no signature line. You say you need to just make sure you add a signature on there on a hard copy. And if you have a review, you may be asked to take a look. They want to see this, that you've agreed to it. So what are you agreeing to on this page? Well, let's take a look. You can find this on the CDE page. It's the page where it has the RFA. That's the page you'll find down underneath the request for application is a link to the legal assurances. So you can find them all there. You should know what they say, because when someone gets unhappy about you agreed to what, they're going to ask you, why didn't you tell us we were agreeing to this? So important to look through them and just make sure there's no red flags for your district. These are all the areas of the assurances. And you can see there are assurances, there are general assurances that apply to general federal and state requirements. Then there are specific programmatic assurances. So you want to look at those that apply to the programs in your district, your LEA. You can see homeless students. There's a whole section of assurances you're agreeing to homeless youth, another one just for foster youth, and then other programs. Each program has, and these are federal requirements. Some of them, just a few reminders on the next slide, are for legal assurances, are some that kind of get sometimes surprised or forgotten. Your assurances for program for English learners, just a reminder that your English learner requirements apply to all LEAs, even if you don't get Title III funds. So there are assurances in the general assurances and such that apply to all. Sometimes people get a review for EL and they say, we don't take Title III. You still have federal obligations to English learners, legal obligations, even if you don't take the money. Education of foster youth was new last year, I think, and it applies to if you're taking Title I Part A, the foster youth. So that's relatively new. You might want to take a look at that. The general assurances, some of them have to do with adherences to civil rights, non-discrimination requirements, supplement, not supplant requirements are included in the assurances. One that sometimes gets lost is that annual evaluation. People say, where did that come from? Well, if you look in the assurances, it says you assure you'll have an annual evaluation based on your local board criteria, showing that all your programs in the consolidated application are not of low effectiveness. So what's that criteria? What does it look like? That's something that you're agreeing to when you assign those, or your superintendent's agreeing to. There's another requirement to allocate funds to continuation schools in the same manner as comprehensive schools. In the past, some districts, it would be, were skipping continuation schools or trying not to serve them, and you have to rank and serve those schools the same as you would other schools. All right, next is another certification page. And this is a certification of protected prayer. And this is in, you say, where did this come from? There's a section in ESSA and it's way at the back, and it's called, it's the 8,000 numbers. Okay, you have title, it's like Title 8, and it has a whole lot of things buried in there. And one is this protection. It's been in there for some time. And it's a federal requirement in the what they call the general provisions, required for all ESSA programs. This is not specific to a particular program. And the certification is basically indicating that the LEA has no policy that prohibits protected prayer. So it's not that you have a policy in this case, it's that you don't have a policy that would do that. Again, it requires certification by your authorized representative, and a signed copy needs to be kept on file. And if you can't certify that, or the answer is no, we do have a policy, then a comment is required. So there's a comment box there, and you can explain if you have a no. And you'll have to, on those pages where it requires a comment, just keep in mind, to be able to certify, you have to put something in the comment box. All right. This one is really confusing, I think, okay, because it says that the LCAP, it refers to the LCAP federal addendum, but it's actually what it's asking for is certification of your LCAP date of approval. So they're asking for districts, you enter the date that the county office approved your county office approval. And that would have been back in, 2017, should be 19, your last LCAP. It's not your current LCAP. It's your last LCAP, because your current one hasn't been approved by the county yet. So your last 3-year LCAP was approved. It was 17, 18, 19, 19, 20, would have been approved, the original approval date. Simple answer here is, look what you put last year. It would be the same because you were still on your last 3-year LCAP. So the approval date was 3 years ago, And if you don't know, your county office has that information. At least we have that. We can check it. Or you check your budget approval letter for 2017. Right there, 17. Yes. Okay. But the best place is just copy what you had last year. That's the date of your LCAP approval. For charter schools, it's just the date of your local board approval of your last 3-year LCAP. So for charters, if you opened after the date for the last LCAP, then that date might be sooner. Team, take a look at that. That date's not ringing true to me. I'm going to double check on the instructions on that, because your last LCAP, it gets so old. Here it is. Yeah, 2017. The date must be on or after July 1, 2017. Okay, because that's when, it seems so long ago. I'm sorry, it threw me. 2017. That's how long it's been. So that's the date that you're going to put in that box. So again, hopefully you can copy what you had last year, and that will work. And remember to save at the bottom once you do the page. Sorry about that. That one threw me for a loop for a second. All right. Next page is finally the application for funding. All right. And this is the page that is requiring your board date, which must be on or before August 31st. The next section is about the DLAC, that the DLAC had an opportunity to review and advise, and this is on the development of programs for English learners. So you just need to make sure that that DLAC date is prior to the date of the board approval. And CDE has indicated in the past that the DLAC signatures, the DLAC doesn't approve the consolidated application, but they need to indicate that they've had input into those programs that apply to English learners. So you need to put a date there for the notes. And the notes are for the date that your DLAC met and that you discussed those programs and that you talked about what you're doing essentially with your Title III program funds, and that would be the date that goes there. So, and then you need to post those minutes too. If you don't have a note, if there's no review date for some reason, then put a comment why you weren't able to get that. Application for funding, you're going to indicate there's just a yes, no, and this is really important. We've had districts forgot to click yes and wondered why they didn't get the funding the next year. So it's simple little section, but it's important. Check yes for all the programs for which you want to apply. All right, so if you want to apply to all the titles are there. Yes, someone mentioned that for the alternative use, that they require a grant award number, and that should be on, generally you received an email confirmation in most cases for that grant, and the rural Title IV Part B grant, and that award number would be on that communication. But I would suggest you contact, if you're having trouble finding it, just contact the department and check with the Title V office. And I think that would be, no, I'll get you the name of the person over there, but they can tell you how you find that grant award number, but it should be on a communication that you received that you are eligible for the award. That's just for your rural programs. All right. Any other things on the application? I think that's it. Again, this is one you're going to have to maintain a copy of it at the board date and board approval date. Okay, next page. Related requirements. All right, there's some things that aren't in the Con App that you need to know about, and that is, we mentioned them before, the LCAP federal addendum. The only people who need to resubmit it are if you're applying first time for funding. You won't be able to receive the funding without having one on file at the department, or if you are applying for a new program, say you've always participated in Title 1 and 3, but now you want to apply for Title 2, you have to submit that section of the addendum. Otherwise, that needs to be updated locally to reflect what you're doing now. If what you reported isn't matching, then you need just update that locally. We had some transfers. We had a question about transfers. If you're thinking of transferring funds, now's the time to think about that. You reported in the winter, but those programs need to know they're getting additional funding or they're losing funding. So you can transfer funds up to 100% in or out of Title II and Title IV, or between those programs, or into Title I and Title III out of those programs. But now's the time to think about it so you can let those programs know so they can plan for it. So you'll report it in the winter, but you need to be doing that. Reservations, you need to identify what funds are going to be reserved. So you want to look at the last year's winter submission and see what all those reservations are and how are you reserving, how much are you reserving, and then those should also be described in the addendum. You'll need to rank your schools, and we'll talk about that in a moment, how you rank them so you can get your Title I programs off and running, and then you need to provide schools with their allocation amounts estimated for planning. So let's look at what that's about. Oops. All right, if you're applying for Title I funds and you have 1,000 or more students and you have multiple schools, okay? If you just have under 1,000 students and you're a single school LEA, so it doesn't apply to most charters. So you're going to see the word district here a lot because charters generally are single schools. You don't have to rank them. But for districts, you have to annually rank your schools based on poverty data, and there are specific ranking rules that you need to follow. You have to maintain documentation that you notified schools throughout the year of their allocation, and it's based on this ranking process. A description of the ranking requirements are on the CDE website on the Title I school allocations page, and they give you detailed information. We're just going to review a few basic things so you can kind of get started. So first of all, what's the purpose of ranking? All right, on the next slide, we'll take a look at that. The purpose is to identify schools for Title I funding. And we had district come in once in the middle of the year, and this new fella and worked in the program. He said, yeah, I got this Title I fund. I just gave, whoever wanted some, I just kind of spread it out there. Whoa, stop, okay? There's a process for how you identify schools that are eligible for Title I funding and how you determine the allocation amounts. And the purpose is to ensure that Title I funds are allocated to schools with the highest concentration of poverty. The idea is not to sprinkle the money around so everybody gets a little bit. That's not how you develop a good program. And it's also to allow schools to develop plans based on their needs and available funding. So what does that look like? When you rank the schools on the next slide, we'll see that an eligible school is a school that's at or above the district poverty rate. But not every eligible school has to be served, and you may not have enough money to serve all your schools. So that's why you rank your schools in order of poverty. You have to use the same measure, and what's going to be in the winter submission, when you do that, when you document your ranking, it's going to be based on 2020 CalPADS free and reduced price meal age 5 through 17 data. So that data is available to you now to use to rank your schools. When it pops up in the winter, that's the data that will show in the Con app. The allocation needs to be sufficient to provide a reasonable expectation of success. So you have to give enough money to each school, and that's where you need to decide what your cut point is. On the next page, there's a few rules. You have to fund first all your schools that are above 75% poverty. So, and for some districts, that's the end of it. Okay, you fund them, that's it. That's most of your schools. But if you have schools over 75, you have to fund them first. Then you can push your high schools up if they have a poverty rate of 50 or more. That was new under ESSA. It allows you to bump up your high schools because high schools were often getting left out. Then after that, you can rank your remaining schools in one of two ways. District-wide, put all your schools in a row, and you're going to rank them all highest poverty, lowest poverty. Or your choice, you can do it by grade span, because we want to serve maybe our elementary schools first, so we'll rank them, then we'll rank our middle, then our high. So you can rank them. When you rank them, then you have to serve them within rank order within the grade span. So you can rank order for the district, and sometimes it's a good idea to do it both ways and look and see, are you hitting the schools that are most in need? So those are what you need to start looking at, and go to the CDE website and they'll give you more information. I think we may have added a few more. What's the next slide, Adrian? Yeah, just a couple rules. And again, this is the idea of pushing the schools to where the highest poverty is. If you have a district-wide poverty rate below 35%, then you would have schools that might have a poverty rate below that. If you're below that rate, then all your Title I funded schools have to receive an allocation of at least 125% per low-income student. So basically what that means is, before you take any funds off for things like administrative costs, you have to consider how you're going to meet that 125% rule. So that's just one of the ways that they try and push the money to the schools in highest poverty. So if you're below 35 and you want to serve schools below 35, then all your Title I schools have to receive at least 125% of the allocation per low-income student. Okay, next, I think we have one other. Yes, so here's where you're going to find the school allocation page. Lots of information there about how to do this, but now's the time to do it. You don't do it in the winter because the year's half over and schools need money to plan. Question is, how do we give them money to plan? Right now, we expect usually about August, we get some estimated Title I entitlements posted. At this time, you can use the administration's proposal is for an increase in Title I, but we never believe in anything till it's final. But for the coming year, we would see that you would use either the same amount that you had this year, or a safe way to budget, to estimate your budget, is to use 85%, because generally there's an 85% hold harmless, so you shouldn't receive less than 85% of what you got last year. So safe for budgeting for schools is to use an 85% amount of your current year's amount when you give them estimated allocations. Always better to be able to raise it later. Okay. All right, so that's the application. We're still going on. The next page is also is for private school consultation, and this one also raises some questions. This is for districts, school districts. Again, charter schools don't serve private schools because it's based on district boundaries, and charters don't have boundaries. So this is, federal law now requires that you inform the California Department of Education, if you're, which is our state agency, that you've met consultation requirements, and this is how you do it. This applies to all your ESSA programs. So it's private, all your private school consultation for any programs. According to the instructions, if a school is outside the attendance area, there's an add a school piece, because for Title I, you might have schools that are outside your attendance area. They're going to list those schools inside your attendance area. So the question is, what you're going to be asked, essentially 3 questions. You're going to be asked, did consultation occur? Yes, no. Was agreement met? And is there a signed affirmation on file? Those are the 3 questions. And sometimes it gets a little, what does exactly that mean? And what does CDE mean by did consultation occur? So let's take a look at the next slide and see what they've shared with us. Okay. This is a form if you don't have private schools, you're just verifying that there were none. I'll go to the next page. Okay, so the first box was, did consultation occur? Okay. CD has shared with us that you would say, yes, consultation occurred if you contacted the private school and you got a response from them, they agreed to participate. Consultation, you sent out a letter. You got a response, they agreed not to participate. You still consulted with them. In either case, you say, yes, consultation occurred. Okay, because you did your due diligence, you sent the letter out and you got a response. You would need to put no only if you didn't get a response back from the private school regarding their intent to participate. In that case, and everyone thought that doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong, right? You need to maintain documentation of multiple attempts to contact. This is not going to result in any kind of error message or anything. It's just you did what you did, they didn't respond. You need to maintain records with dates of contact, who you contacted, the results for both participating and non-participating, and those who didn't participate. But if they didn't respond, you can't say that consultation occurred, even though you did what you needed to do. The next one was agreement met. An agreement was met whether or not they agreed to participate. So you say, if a private school said, yes, we want to participate, then there was agreement. You both agreed you're going to participate. If agreement was not met, if the LEA, if they didn't agree, agreement, if they said they didn't want to participate, agreement was still met because you agreed not to participate. Okay, so in either case, agreement was met. Again, if agreement was not met, it could be that they didn't agree with, in consultation, they didn't agree with the program you were talking about. They said, no, that's not what we want. And you said, no, this is what our decision is. Again, that doesn't mean you did something wrong if it wasn't met. What it means is you have to provide them with the reasons in writing for your decision. The decision always rests with the LEA, the final decision, but you need to provide them, if you disagree, reasons in writing. You would say agreement was not met, and you've done your due diligence still. Then there are several consultation codes, and that's going to be based on the response from the private school. And that's going to be in that, when they have the signed agreement, they're going to say that meaningful consultation occurred. Or if it didn't, again, that would be if you put a no in the last one, you would have to say a timely and meaningful consultation didn't occur, the design is not equitable, or timely and meaningful consultation didn't occur and the design was not equitable. Again, these consultation codes are based on the response from the private school. These are not what you're saying happened. This is what the private school put on your agreement that they send back to you. Okay, so that's only going to, the answer typically would be yes, meaningful consultation occurred. That's the first one. But if agreement was not met, they would have indicated one of the other three. Okay, so that form, it looks simple, but those are kind of the yes no's. Again, if you've done your job, you've done your job, and it's not that if agreement wasn't met and you did everything you needed to do, that's what you need to document. All right, next is private school. Okay, then CDE recommends you keep all of this information, the dates, who you contacted, and then everything for those that chose not to participate. Your signed affirmation, that's where you should have those 4 questions listed, is on that affirmation. Okay, onward to the next one is, again, verification. This is an interesting comment that's showed up in the last few years, that CDE is expected to engage, when you engage in consultation, you are expected to verify the status and accuracy of student enrollment data and their nonprofit status. We have not been given direction on how you do that, what you should be looking for, or what that process is. But bottom line, CDE does not check any of the numbers for private schools. They submit it as in an affidavit, So if they give you numbers that don't seem to match what you're seeing, you go out in the school and you see 2 kids and they said 200, you have a right to check it. CDE does not verify that accuracy. So this is particularly for Title 2 and 4, where you're using the whole enrollment. You want to see, is it reasonable? You know, what you're seeing as what's going on in that school and what's reported, and CDE's saying it's on you to check that. Okay, let's move ahead to off of private schools, 1 page, but it triggers a lot. And we're back to Title III. And this is the only program that requires you to submit a budget for the coming year. Title III, EL, and immigrant. None of the other programs require that. You're going to have a source data here, an estimated Title III per pupil allocation. Right? So your CDE is giving you what they think the allocation is going to be per pupil for Title III, and that's going to be included in the box. What you in the top line in the box, what you're going to put in is your October 7th, 2020 CalPADS EL numbers, and that's going to give you an estimate of your total allocation for 2021-22. A funding amount is for each of these boxes. There's a required funding because these are all required areas. We said how the budgeting looks, the expenditure and budgeting pages look different for Title III. Each of these is required for Title III. Professional development is part of Title III requirements, programs and other authorized activities. So that's direct services, EL and academic achievement, and parent and family engagement, which was added a few years ago. So you have to have money in each of those. This again has your indirect and direct admin, and this is the same as in the expenditure pages, an error message if you exceed 2%. So this is an estimated budget for your Title III EL program. And as you look at, you might look at your federal addendum and see what you have written in there and see if it needs to be updated. And so your budget kind of matches what you say in your addendum. Okay, and then the same thing, I believe, is for immigrant. Yeah, you're going to get an estimate there too. So again, it's the only program they give you at least a heads up on what your funding might look like. So they'll give you an estimated per pupil amount, and where you're going to go is, and this is only applicable to some LEAs. So if you don't see immigrant, this page showing up, it means you're not eligible. You have to show at least 21 immigrant students and an increase of 1% or more over an average of 2 years. This changed a couple of years. Last year it changed. It used to be 2%, but now it's only 1% increase. But if you meet that criteria, this page will pop up and you're eligible for immigrant funding. You can see how much by putting in your CalPADS immigrant count in that box and do a recalculation. And then the budget only has 1 area, authorized activities, because immigrant requirements are not as stringent as the EL, and then direct and indirect costs, and a warning for administrative costs. All right, and I think the last page and is substitute time reporting, and it's and most people don't use this. This is different than the substitute time reporting that we've had around for many, many years, which many districts are already using. This was a substitute system that was developed probably about 5 years ago. It's only applicable to employees who are on predetermined fixed schedules. And it can't be used in conjunction with what we call the sampling method, which is what is in what many of you have been using for years. In other words, you can sample, you do an estimate of your time reporting, and then you true it up every few months. And if your match is not over a certain percentage, then they allow you to move from monthly to less frequent reporting. And all of this is in the California School Accounting Manual Procedure 905. Both systems are listed there. The only issue with this is that if you want to use this system, you can't also use the other system. And this system is very limited because it doesn't include people like you who don't have a predetermined fixed schedule. You know, you're changing all the time. If you had primarily or only people who were like instructional assistants who are assigned to a classroom, it works for them. But because you can't use the two together, it's often not really helpful to a district to use this one. But if for some reason, I would suggest you contact the department and talk with the fiscal folks up there and see if it would make sense for you. But in most cases, it sounded good when they developed it, but for most people, it doesn't work out. And if you do decide to go with this, you have to, it's an interesting disclosure in the law, you have to disclose any known deficiencies with the system or challenges in implementing it. Or you could say there are no known deficiencies. So what might go wrong if you implemented this system? I guess is what they want to know. But it's very specific. You have to go back if any of your people, if their schedules change, that can throw you back into another system. It's a rather complex. So read Procedure 905 if you have an interest in this, and then contact CDE Fiscal for guidance on it before moving forward. Just our recommendation. All right, I think we're almost there. I knew we were going to do early. I told you it was shorter. All right, wait a minute. Back up. 21, 22. Is that a repeat? Sure is. Okay, I'm going to tell you twice. Okay, it's a duplicate slide. Oh no, they threw another report in there. No, ignore that slide. So sorry about that. All right. All right, next.
Honey, the first one was the 21-22, and the second one says 2021.
Oh, okay. That's what, yes, I'm sorry. That's last year's. Yes, I'm sorry. We'll delete that before we post. Well, we already posted it. We'll go back and fix it. Apologies. All right. Nothing's changed. Okay, on that. All right. All right, so you are almost finished. All right, before you finish, what you want to do is return to the home page. That's that first page, and make sure everything on the right-hand side as you look, it says certified. And that means all your reports have gone through, you're good to go, okay? And there's nothing, I'm gonna look, where's the button I push? If it shows certified for all of them, you're done, all right? And make sure. And I think that is good to go. We'll give you some context there. Again, the CONAP support desk is helpful if you have technical issues. So anything with the system, it's not working, contact the CONAP support desk. Also, if you have to reopen a page, I didn't mention that on your private school, if you had a change, you may have to go back and change a prior page. If you have a private school that it's not being served and you reported it in the winter submission as being served, you're going to have to go back and remove them from that prior page. The CONAP support desk can usually help you with things like that. Sometimes if they can't, they'll refer you to a program person. Otherwise, the program staff are best to contact if you have a program question, and they're pretty good about it. Jeffrey Naguru in Title III is amazing. He'll get back to you right away with questions. If we can help you, that's great too. Usually we'll point you to one of them, but we're happy to answer any questions you might have. All right, but before we go, let's see what we've got. See, if I wait long enough, you find the answer. Good job, Luz. All right. If you're missing, okay, if you're missing, thank you for mentioning that, Blanca. If you're missing data collection, you go into your homepage and you see something is missing that's not there, contact the CONAP support desk. They'll probably refer you to the program office, but if you think you should be receiving that, if it's a funding that you received that you should be reporting on, or something that you know that your district is participating in and it's not showing up, then contact them. Usually you can't, usually you can't, usually you can't Yeah, usually it will show up, but if something's missing, it could be that they made an error and missed you. Why would an LEA not be able to apply for Title III but then not receive it? Okay, yeah, it could be that you need to join a consortia. So I'd check with the Title III office, because if it's showing up that you have English learner, Title III immigrant, you need, but yeah, if you certified the page in the past and the funds didn't show up, then I'd contact, that's a question for the Title III office. But yeah, because for immigrant, it would show up, your page should show up if you met the criteria. For Title III EL, it's just based on your number of ELs. So I definitely, if you're not seeing an allocation coming through, I would talk to, again, try Jeffrey Naguru. He's in the Title III office. He's very helpful and can give you a clear answer. What else did we do? It's found the answer. Substitute time, that means, yeah, substitute time reporting, yes, it is primarily for classified. And that's the problem, is that it doesn't work for a lot of certificated people, and your system has to cover both. So yes, it's primarily classified people who are doing the same thing every day. Could be, if you know, but usually don't have classroom teachers for federal programs. So they're usually like coaches or people that move around. So that's, you're exactly right. Not seeing it under my, where's the private school consultation form found? There is, well, I think CDE may have some posted, help me out team, but we also have some forms that we took from them. I'm not sure CDE is updated there. It's not a consult, it's an affirmation form, affirmation of consultation. Send us an email and we'll get that to you. If school responds that they will consult with us and don't show up, how do we mark it? Yeah. So then they didn't show up, consultation did not occur. You would just document, and you need a document, you know, here's when we had a meeting, you know, here's what happened. I would follow up with them with some kind of written communication that, you know, we intended to meet, well, you didn't meet, see you next year, I guess, you know, that, but I would definitely document it. Again, you did your due diligence if you contacted them, set up an appointment, and then nothing happened. A charter school with 1,000 students from multiple sites. Generally, it depends. It depends if you're required to submit a separate application for each site, then no, you don't have to rank. If you're putting all those schools on one ConApp, then you would need to rank. So the question would be, does each of your charters receive an individual allocation through a ConApp submission, or do they all receive one? You know, do you have one chunk and you've got to divide it? If you have to do that, then I've never heard of that with a charter school, but that would be how you'd make that decision. If all the funds are in one application and all your schools are included, then those should pop up. But usually, unless they have separate CDS codes, they probably wouldn't. They probably are getting separate applications, but that would be the deciding. One application, yes, then you rank. Separate applications, no, they get an individual allocation. Private school responds after. You know, I'll tell you, CDE allows private schools to come in late, and we always recommend that you give them a deadline. But if you didn't do that, like in your letter, if you say you have multiple attempts, you attempt, nothing, or you say, if we don't hear from you, but if they declined funding and they respond after you have an approved allocation, Sylvia Hanna is probably the best person to talk to about that. But I guess it would, if you have documentation that they declined, it seems like you could say, well, we'll consult with you again for next year. But because that gets kind of sticky sometimes, I'd clear it with Sylvia, so you make sure that she's supportive of that response. Okay. Oh, there is a CDE website. You're asking about how do you determine which schools are in your attendance area? There's a county link, and you can go into that on the CDE website, indicate your district, and you can even indicate schools that are nonprofit. You can, filter it, and it will show up just the nonprofit schools with 6 or more kids in your district that you're required to consult with that are nonprofit. And you need a district code for that. We may need to get that back out to you, but I'm not sure where that is. Francisco, send us an email. We'll send it to you. Are you required to school serves in adjacent attendance area? You're required to consult with them. And if they have students, if they're adjacent to you, you should be reaching out to see if they have any of your students who reside in your attendance areas. Usually, if you have a bunch of kids from your district that attend particular private schools outside the district, then you definitely should connect with them. You really should, connect with any that are within a reasonable distance and see if they have your students. So, and yes, you're required to serve them. You can do that one of two ways. One could be that you provide directs, and again, it would have to be, first of all, do they generate funding? That means it's a low-income child who lives in one of your Title I school attendance areas. That generates funding. Secondly, you consult, you come up with criteria. What criteria are you going to use to serve the students? If nobody meets that criteria, then you don't have to serve them. And if they don't generate any funding, you don't have to serve them. But if you find there are students there, one way to do that is to consult with your neighboring district and develop a memo of understanding, and you have to transfer the funds for services for that student to the neighboring district, and they can serve them that way. But you're responsible for the services, but you can work with the district. If they have a program there and they can include eligible students from your area, you can do it that way too. Or you can just serve those students. Yeah. Page is not showing. Information on transfers in and out. Yeah, where do you find federal transferability? Could you follow up? Maybe you could shoot us an email and we'll see. I'm trying to think where there would be detailed. It would, where it would be? Yes. Look in the instructions for the winter consolidated application submission. Go to CD website. This is a question about information on transfers in and out. Go to this Department of Education website, type in Con App Winter 2020 instructions, and they should pop up for you. And in there, look at the federal transferability page, and the instructions for that page should tell you the rules for transferability. Given the application due July 27, boards can approve the 31st. We can post date a board approval. Yes, through August 31st. You can put a board approval date. So determine when your board meeting will be, that you're going to take it to the board, put that date on your application. Yes. Transferring 2 into 4. If transferring Title II into Title IV, do the 20% minimum category appliances requirements? Yes. Okay, once you transfer money into a program from another program, the rules of the program into which it's transferred apply. So if you add money to Title IV from Title II, yes, the requirements will apply to that. So that 20% requirement now applies to the total of the funds that you transfer. Along that line, though, one thing we found out is that if you transfer funds, the requirement for the program, if you transfer 100% of your Title II funds, say, out into Title IV, the rules of Title II still apply to you, okay, because you accepted the funding. So now you have the rules kind of for both of them that apply, but the funding minimums for Title IV would apply to all the funds that you transfer in. Yes, that's right, Scott. If we choose not to transfer Title IV moving forward, do we need to write? No, not transfer is the norm. Okay. Yeah. If you, each year you would make that decision about the current year's funds. So if you don't transfer, you'll report that in February, and you're not required to do anything. You just don't. What if we don't have Title III program? If you want to apply for it, and you have English learners counted in CalPADS, you can apply for it. If you don't have Title III. Title V is asking grant award. I think we've kind of covered. Am I missing anything? Oh, 6 students. Yes, CDE has clarified that that below that it's considered a homeschool, not a private school. So that's why they have a 6 student filter in the and when you go to that website, you can say 6 or more students. So we got clarification from CDE. They count 6 students. They consider it homeschooling, not a private school. So you're not required to serve it. And make sure you check that they're nonprofit. You don't have to serve if they say for profit. You don't serve those. All right. All right. If you have other questions, feel free to email us. We're here. And ConApp support desk is great. And so are your page contacts. So hope good luck. Happy ConApping. And hope you get some time to do something other than that this summer. All right. Well, take care. Hope to hear from you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.